Get out! This is where you get off! My son's words hit harder than the 22 DGF wind chill as he shoved me from his Mercedes into a raging blizzard. 6 hours earlier, we'd buried my husband of 53 years. Now, in my funeral dress, I stared at the $137,192 withdrawal slips in my purse, bearing my son's forged signature. The same son whose college education I'd paid for by scrubbing office floors until my hands bled. The same son who now wore a $6,400 Rolex while telling me I'd become too expensive. As hypothermia set in and my fingers turned blue-white with frostbite, I made a discovery inside the abandoned gas station that changed everything, a forgotten toolbox containing a pencil and receipt paper. With hands shaking from cold and betrayal, I began documenting every instance of my son's deception, knowing that if I survived the night, I would need evidence. And if I didn't survive, someone would know what he had done. Before I reveal how a hidden toolbox became evidence that imprisoned my own son, subscribe to Her Silver Truth for daily stories of abandoned mothers who turned betrayal into justice that changed laws. The doctors said I should have died that night, a 73-year-old abandoned for 80 hours in sub-zero temperatures. They called my survival medically inexplicable. What they didn't understand was that rage generates more heat than love. As frostbite claimed 3 of my fingers and hypothermia slowed my heart, I wasn't planning my goodbye. I was mentally cataloguing every shred of evidence I'd been collecting since the first time my son called me confused in front of my banker. I met Robert in 1968 at Andy's Diner, where I worked night shifts to put myself through teaching college. He'd just returned from Vietnam and still flinched at sudden noises. "You have the kindest eyes I've ever seen," he told me on our 3rd date, pressing his father's gold pocket watch into my palm. "When I look at you, the war fades away." We married in 1969, exactly 1 week after watching Neil Armstrong walk on the moon on my parents' Zenith television. "If mankind can reach the stars," Robert whispered, "imagine what our love can build on Earth." What we built was a life of calculated sacrifices. When interest rates hit 18% in 1981, I sold my grandmother's diamond brooch to make our mortgage payment. When Michael needed braces in 1983, I secretly cleaned office buildings from 9 p.m. to midnight after teaching 3rd graders all day. My fingers would crack and bleed from the industrial cleaners, but I'd bandage them before Michael woke for school. For Michael's college fund, I tutored struggling readers every Saturday for 12 years, depositing exactly $157,043 each month into a separate account. By his high school graduation in 1988, I had saved $22,065 enough for his first 2 years at State University. When Michael married Diane in 1994, we withdrew $15,000 from our retirement account, money that would never be replaced. "It's worth it," I told Robert when he worried. I hand-sewed 47 table runners for the reception, staying up until 3 a.m. for weeks despite the arthritis that had begun twisting my fingers like gnarled tree roots. In 2010, when Michael's real estate business faltered, we mortgaged our paid-off home to loan him $137,092. The number is seared into my memory because it represented our security, our future. "Just until the market recovers," he promised. Signing a loan agreement I stored in my fireproof box beside Robert's pocket watch, and our wedding certificate. When Robert suffered his first heart attack in 2018, I became his full-time caregiver. I learned to administer 7 different medications 4 times daily, each with specific requirements: Plavix with food, Lasix before 2 p.m. to prevent nighttime bathroom trips, nitroglycerin tablets under the tongue at precisely the right moment when his chest pains began. "Mum's a better nurse than most professionals," Michael would brag to his friends at church. "Dad's lucky to have her." They saw a devoted son who adored his aging parents. What they couldn't see was how his visits always coincided with pension deposit days, or how he'd begun taking photos of our valuables when he thought I wasn't looking. I created the perfect foundation. 53 years of documented sacrifices, decades of putting my family first. The perfect story for Michael to exploit when Robert's heart finally gave out on January 12, 2023. The perfect backdrop for the betrayal that would leave me fighting for my survival in sub-zero temperatures just hours after burying my husband. The first red flag appeared exactly 94 days before Robert's death. I had fallen in the shower, nothing serious, just a bruised hip that bloomed purple-black against my pale skin. Michael arrived the next day, concern etched on his face that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mom, this house is a death trap for you and Dad," he said while examining our kitchen cabinets. "Those stairs will kill you both." "We've managed for 50 years," Robert replied. "Well, things change. I've found a nice assisted living place about an hour from me. Willow Creek, they have an opening next month." "An hour from our church, our friends?" Robert's voice sharpened. "Your property tax assessment came in at $8,643 this year. That's robbery for two people on fixed incomes," Michael countered, pulling out the tax statement from our own mail pile. "This house is worth $427,000 now. It's just sitting here, empty equity you can't use." 3 days later, I discovered Michael in Robert's office at 2:17 a.m., photographing our financial documents with his cell phone. I watched silently from the darkened hallway as he carefully replaced each paper exactly as he'd found it. "Just getting Dad some Tylenol," he explained when I deliberately made a noise. The bottle of Tylenol sat untouched on the corner of the desk as he quickly pocketed his phone. The following week, he brought soup and insisted on organizing our medication. "You've been mixing up your pills, Mum," he said loudly enough for Robert to hear from the living room. "Dad mentioned you gave him the wrong dosage twice this week." It was a lie. I used a colour-coded pill organizer and had never once made an error. But when I looked to Robert for confirmation, Michael smoothly interrupted. "Dad's too kind to say anything, but I noticed it too. At your age, it's understandable." At my age? As if 73 years of perfect competence could be erased by a casual comment. As if the woman who had managed household finances through 7 recessions couldn't count out simple medications. If you've ever felt that cold shiver of realization when someone you trusted tells a deliberate lie about you, a lie designed to make others question your competence, leave the word gaslighting in the comments. Our generation didn't have that term, but we recognize the manipulation that prepares the ground for exploitation. But what I couldn't understand yet was the phone call I overheard Michael making from our porch 3 weeks before Robert died. "Once Dad's gone, it'll be simple." "She's already showing signs. No, I've got power of attorney ready. The policy pays out immediately. We just need one signature." What happened after Robert's death revealed a betrayal so carefully orchestrated that it had been in motion for years. While I was busy changing bandages and counting out pills, my son was counting my assets and planning exactly how to make me disappear from my own life. Robert's funeral was on a bitter January morning. The church pews were filled with friends and neighbours, but somehow I was seated in the second row. Michael and Diane took the positions where the spouse should be. "It's easier for the receiving line this way, Mom," he'd explained. At the reception, I overheard Michael talking to Robert's former colleague, Thomas. "Mum's taking it hard, getting confused about basic things. Called me by Dad's name twice yesterday." A complete fabrication. My mind was clear as ever, sharpened by grief rather than dulled by it. When I tried to thank everyone for coming, Michael smoothly interrupted. "Mum's too emotional to speak right now. We all know how fragile she is." Fragile. The word landed like a slap. I'd held our family together through every crisis for half a century. I'd worked 2 jobs during recessions. I'd nursed my husband through heart disease for years. Later, when I mentioned distributing some of Robert's personal items to his closest friends, Michael patted my hand condescendingly. "Don't worry about that, Mum. You're confused about what Dad would have wanted. We'll handle everything." Every "you're confused," every interrupted sentence, every decision made without consulting me. They were all deliberate steps to paint me as incompetent, not just to others, but to myself. The evening after the funeral, while neighbours brought casseroles and grief hung heavy in the air, Michael appeared with a stack of papers. "Just some funeral arrangements to finalise, Mum," he said, his voice smoothly efficient. "Sign here and here. No need to read all this legal jargon, it's just standard stuff." My fingers trembled with exhaustion as I signed where he pointed. The next morning I found copies on the counter. Not funeral arrangements, power of attorney documents, medical power, financial power, property power, all signed over to Michael. A week later, I discovered my monthly bank statement showed 2 large withdrawals I hadn't made, $5,000 each, transferred to an account I didn't recognise. When I called the bank, they told me Michael had come in with paperwork showing he had authority to manage my accounts due to my cognitive issues. The safety deposit box where Robert and I kept our original will, property deed, and his life insurance policy. Suddenly, I couldn't access it. "Your son changed the access requirements," the bank manager explained, looking uncomfortable. "He said you were having memory problems." Michael began rewriting our family history in small, cutting ways. "Dad was always the one who handled the money," he told a neighbour within my hearing. "I had managed our household budget for decades. Mum never really understood Dad's work at Midwest Electric," he said to another friend. "I had proofread every report Robert ever wrote, learned the industry jargon so we could discuss his projects. My photo albums disappeared from the living room shelves, replaced with newer ones that featured more pictures of Michael's family and fewer of Robert and me in our younger years. The garden I had tended for 40 years. "We should really hire someone to fix this mess," Michael said, as if my prize-winning roses weren't still blooming exactly as they had for decades. Slowly, methodically, the narrative changed. I wasn't Eleanor Pearson, who had taught hundreds of children to read, who had weathered economic downturns with resourcefulness, who had kept meticulous records of every family milestone. I was just an elderly mother, confused, burdensome, disappearing. What my son never realised was that with every dismissive comment and behind-my-back conversation, he was actually revealing his true character. Not just to me, but to others who'd known our family for decades. While he thought age had weakened me, it had actually given me something invaluable: the power of patience and careful observation. For weeks, I quietly collected my evidence: bank statements hidden in my sewing basket, conversations recorded on the simple handheld recorder I'd used for teaching, and, most importantly, my detailed journals documenting every financial transaction and conversation since Robert's first heart attack. Michael thought he was closing the walls around me, never suspecting I was building my case with the persistence that comes from surviving 7 decades of life's challenges. Many of us have heard these dismissive words: confused, emotional, forgetful, when trying to express legitimate concerns. We see the looks exchanged over our heads, as if age has somehow rendered us invisible in conversations about our own lives. But what younger generations fail to understand about us is that we've weathered far worse challenges than their dismissal. We've survived economic recessions, personal losses, health crises, and decades of adapting to a changing world. That's exactly why I began documenting everything: every conversation, every bank statement, every changed access code. Our generation knows the value of paper records, of evidence that can't be deleted with a keystroke. What Michael didn't know was that I had already called my sister Claire in Minnesota. "Something's wrong," I'd whispered into the phone when I was certain Michael had left. "I don't feel safe anymore." What I couldn't have predicted was how crucial that call would become after what happened next. If you've ever had your concerns dismissed because of your age, been called dramatic or confused when you knew you were right, tap the like button now. It's our quiet way of standing together, a reminder that wisdom doesn't diminish with age, even when respect from others sometimes does. The day after Robert's funeral, Michael insisted on driving me home from a brief visit to the cemetery. The January sky was already darkening at 4:30 p.m., weather reports warning of an approaching ice storm. Heavy flakes began hitting the windshield as we drove. "I've been thinking, Mom," Michael said. "It doesn't make sense for you to rattle around in that big house alone." "I've lived there for over 50 years, Michael. It's my home." "It's a money pit," he countered. "The property taxes alone eat up most of your social security." I stared out the window, watching familiar landmarks pass by. Mrs. Henderson's bakery, where I'd bought Robert's birthday cakes for decades. The park where we'd taken Michael to play as a child. "Besides," Michael continued, "we've already made arrangements." My head snapped towards him. "What arrangements?" "Diane and I found a nice assisted living facility, Silver Pines. They have an opening next week." "Next week? But I don't want—" "It's all been arranged, Mom. We've already sold the house." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "You what? You can't sell my house without my permission." Michael's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Actually, I can. You signed power of attorney papers last night, remember? After the wake? Those papers, the ones he'd rushed me through, telling me they were funeral arrangements." My stomach dropped as I realized what had happened. "That's illegal," I whispered. "I didn't know what I was signing." "Who do you think they'll believe, Mom? A grieving widow who can barely remember to take her medications, or her concerned son who's just looking out for her best interests?" Instead of heading toward our neighborhood, Michael took an unexpected turn onto Route 16, heading away from town. The ice storm was intensifying. "Where are we going?" I asked, fear rising in my throat. "To see your new home. You'll like Silver Pines, and Diane and I will like the extra space when we sell your house." "Stop the car, Michael. I mean it." He ignored me, driving faster as the snow intensified. We were in rural country with only occasional farmhouses breaking up the snowy landscape. "This isn't the way to any assisted living facility," I said. Michael's laugh held no warmth. "No, it's not. Silver Pines is actually 3 hours away, but I figured you might not be cooperative. Why waste my gas?" He suddenly pulled to the side of the road, near an old gas station that had been closed for years. The wind howled around us, ice pellets striking the car like tiny bullets. "Get out," he said. "What? Michael, it's freezing. There's an ice storm." "Get out!" he shouted, reaching across me to shove open my door. The bitter cold immediately rushed in. "There's a phone in that gas station. If it works, call your precious sister Claire. Maybe she can take you in." "Michael, please," I begged. "I'm your mother." His eyes were cold as the ice forming on the windshield when he spoke the words I'll never forget. "And this is where you get off. You've become too expensive, Mum." In that moment, something inside me changed. A lifetime of nurturing and sacrifice crystallized into a single hard point of determination. I clutched my handbag containing Robert's watch and my small wallet as Michael practically pushed me from the car. My funeral dress offered no protection against the bitter wind, but I stood straight-backed in the swirling snow, refusing to crumple as his taillights disappeared into the white curtain of the blizzard. Let me pause here, because what I did next surprised even me. The Eleanor who had baked cookies for a son who was stealing from her, the woman who had apologized for being a burden when asking for help, she was gone. Left behind in that ice storm was the dutiful mother. What emerged was something else entirely. So many of us have experienced that clarifying moment when the fog of self-doubt suddenly lifts. That instant when years of dismissals and diminishments crystallize into perfect clarity, and we see the truth without filters. They mistake our patience for weakness, our kindness for naivety, our silence for acceptance. They assume that because our bodies have aged, our minds and spirits have diminished as well. What my son failed to understand was that my generation survived economic downturns by being resourceful. We managed households before credit cards by keeping meticulous records. We navigated life before GPS and cell phones by being observant and prepared. I realized then that my years of careful record-keeping, the habit my son had mocked as Mum's obsession with those old-fashioned files, was about to become my greatest weapon. My attention to detail, my handwritten journals, my carefully preserved documents. These weren't signs of being old-fashioned. They were tools of survival. But first, I had to survive the night. The abandoned gas station's door was unlocked, mercifully. Inside was nearly as cold as outside, with no working phone as I'd feared. What I didn't know then was that someone had driven past that very night, capturing a crucial piece of evidence I would only discover months later. The Hansons found me the next morning, Martha and Tom, a farming couple in their 60s who were horrified to find a woman in funeral clothes who'd spent the night in an abandoned gas station. They helped me call my sister Claire in Minnesota, who immediately said she was driving down to get me. "We need to document everything," Claire said when she arrived 2 days later with her daughter Sarah, an attorney. "Every conversation, every document, every action Michael has taken." And so began what I now call my strategic patience phase. Sarah helped me understand my legal rights, while Claire helped me gather evidence. My meticulous nature proved invaluable. First, we discovered that Michael had indeed filed the power of attorney documents and had already listed my house for sale. He'd told neighbours I had chosen to move to assisted living and didn't want visitors during my transition. "He's counting on your embarrassment," Sarah explained. "Most elderly victims don't report financial abuse from family members because they're ashamed." "I'm not ashamed," I said. "I'm furious." While staying with Claire, I began building my case. I recorded every memory of conversations about finances with Michael. I listed every item of value in my home with photographs Claire had taken during a quick visit while Michael was at work. I drafted timeline after timeline, showing the progressive pattern of Michael's behaviour. Most crucially, we needed to retrieve the documents from the hidden compartment in my roll-top desk, the compartment Robert had built specifically to secure duplicates of our important papers. "We'll need to get into the house," Claire said, her eyes showing the same determination I felt, "and I know just how we'll do it." What happened next would not only change my family forever, but would also create ripples through our entire community, ultimately helping dozens of other elderly individuals recognize and fight back against similar exploitation. The moment I reclaimed my power began with a simple knock on my own front door. Claire posed as a potential buyer for my house, calling the real estate agent Michael had hired. "I'd like to see the property on Oakwood Drive," she said, using her married name that Michael wouldn't recognize. I waited in the car, my heart pounding as Claire entered my home with the unsuspecting agent. 20 minutes later, Claire emerged with her large purse bulging suspiciously. Once safely away, she revealed what she'd retrieved from the hidden compartment in my desk, a treasure trove that would become Michael's undoing. Inside was the original copy of our most recent will, updated just 4 months earlier with Mr. Kellerman, specifically stating that any power of attorney had to be verified in person with him. There were copies of all our financial documents, showing my signature on all major decisions, proof of my financial competence for decades. But the most damning evidence was something I hadn't even known existed: an envelope addressed to me in Robert's handwriting. "For Ellie, to be opened in case of emergency." Inside was a letter Robert had written 3 months before his death, after Michael's first suggestion about selling the house. "My dearest Ellie, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and something has happened to make you doubt our son. I've seen the way he looks at our home, our belongings, the way he talks about your confusion when you've always been sharper than both of us combined. I've made arrangements with Kellerman. Michael doesn't know, but I've changed my life insurance policy. While I told him he was the beneficiary to help with his business, I actually made you the sole beneficiary. The policy information is enclosed. Trust your instincts, my love. You've always seen people clearly. Forever yours, Robert." Attached was the life insurance policy for $250,000. Money Michael had been counting on, money he believed was coming to him, money that legally belonged to me alone. He abandoned me in an ice storm for nothing. I whispered, the full scope of the betrayal finally clear. He threw away our relationship for money he was never going to get. With this new evidence, Sarah helped me formulate a legal strategy. First, we filed for an emergency injunction to stop the sale of my house, citing fraud in the power of attorney documentation. The court date is set for next month, Sarah said. Until then, we need to gather as much supporting evidence as possible. We contacted Mr. Kellerman, who was horrified by what had happened. I specifically designed your will to prevent exactly this kind of exploitation, he said. I can testify to your cognitive capabilities and to Robert's concerns about Michael's financial interests. Claire and I created a meticulous timeline of events, beginning with the first time Michael had suggested selling the house through the fraudulent power of attorney signing to the abandonment in the ice storm. My journals proved invaluable, decades of detailed records showing a clear pattern. We should report the abandonment to the police, Claire urged. What he did was criminal, leaving you in a life-threatening situation. I hesitated, the maternal instinct to protect my child still strong despite everything. Let's focus on getting my house back first, I decided. One battle at a time. We contacted my neighbours and friends, gathering statements about my cognitive clarity and independence. Mrs. Henderson from the bakery wrote about how I still calculated my purchases faster than her cash register. My doctor provided medical records showing no cognitive decline. Each piece of evidence was carefully organised in colour-coded folders. My organisational system now serving its most important purpose. We're almost ready, Sarah said after weeks of preparation. But there's still one thing missing, proof of the abandonment. It's your word against his, and Michael will likely claim he left you at a friend's house or somewhere safe. What none of us knew was that proof already existed, captured by chance on a cold January night. 2 days before the court hearing, Tom Hansen called Claire's house where I was staying. "Eleanor, I just remembered something that might help you," he said, his voice excited. "My truck has a dashboard camera. I drive that route by the old gas station every night after checking on my brother's farm. I would have been passing by right around the time you said Michael left you there." My hands trembled as I held the phone. "Do you think—" "I'm checking the footage right now," Tom said. "If Michael's car is on there, if there's any evidence of what happened, the dashcam footage would either prove my story beyond doubt or leave us relying solely on documentation and testimony. Everything hinged on what Tom's camera might have captured on that stormy night." The county courthouse was built in 1927, its wood-panelled courtroom smelling of lemon oil and tension. Michael sat with his $800 per hour attorney at the polished oak table, both in custom-tailored suits that reeked of my stolen equity. I wore my best church dress, the same one I'd worn to 3 funerals and a wedding, carefully preserved for special occasions. "Mrs. Pearson is clearly suffering from grief-induced confusion," Michael's attorney began, his voice dripping with rehearsed concern. "Her wild accusations about being abandoned in a storm are frankly impossible to believe. My client was merely helping his mother transition to appropriate care after his father's passing." Michael nodded, his eyes appropriately downcast, the picture of a devoted son unfairly maligned. He'd already presented a falsified timeline, claiming he'd dropped me at my sister's house willingly, with photographs of Claire's home he'd pulled from Facebook as evidence. He presented witnesses, his wife Diane, his business partner, and a paid geriatric specialist, who'd never met me but testified about how common it is for elderly widows to create false narratives after losing spouses. When it was our turn, Sarah first presented the medical examinations, showing no cognitive impairment, followed by my impeccably documented financial records showing the exact timeline of exploitation. "And now," Sarah said, "we'd like to present our final evidence regarding the abandonment claim." Michael's smirk was barely concealed. We had no witnesses to the abandonment. No proof beyond my word against his. Or so he thought. Sarah played the dashboard camera footage. Through the snowy static of Tom Hansen's truck camera, the timestamp clear, January 15th, 5:17 p.m. Michael's distinctive Mercedes pulled alongside the abandoned Dixon's gas station. The crackling audio captured his voice with perfect clarity. "Get out!" his recorded voice commanded. Then, most damningly, "This inheritance has been delayed long enough. Dad's life insurance paid out to me yesterday. I don't need you alive anymore." The courtroom froze. The judge's pen stopped mid-note. Michael's attorney dropped his legal pad. And Michael, the son I'd sacrificed everything for, went parchment white as his own voice convicted him. I still remember the exact moment when the courtroom heard my son's voice through the dashboard camera's microphone. The storm had muffled some sounds, but 3 sentences came through with perfect clarity, words that would ultimately restore everything I had lost and force Michael to face the consequences of his actions. There comes a moment when each of us must decide between keeping peace and demanding justice, when we must weigh a lifetime of maternal protection against the need for personal dignity and safety. Our generation was raised to protect family unity at all costs, to keep private matters private, to sacrifice our own needs for harmony. These values served us well in building lasting marriages and raising children, but they can be weaponized against us when those we've protected turn on us. That's why I chose the courtroom as the place to finally stand firm. Not out of vengeance, but because the public record would protect not just me, but potentially others from similar exploitation. Because sometimes justice requires witnesses. The strength to face my son across that courtroom didn't come from anger. It came from the same place that had driven me to work extra jobs during recessions, to care for my husband through illness, to build a secure home for my family. It came from self-respect and the determination that had guided me through 73 years of meeting life's challenges head-on. Through the dashboard camera's audio, the courtroom heard Michael's voice clearly. "And this is where you get off. You've become too expensive, Mum. Dad's life insurance paid out to me, not you. Did he know that? And now I need to sell that house to cover my debts." Michael's face drained of colour. His attorney frantically scribbled notes, whispering urgently in his ear. The judge's expression hardened. "Turn it up, please," the judge requested. My heart pounded as my son's voice filled the courtroom again. "Someone will come along, probably." The recording showed his car pulling away, taillights disappearing into the blizzard. Then Tom Hansen's voice on the recording. "What the hell? Was that someone getting dropped off at the old Dixon place in this storm?" The camera showed Tom slowing down, peering through the snow at the gas station but not seeing me inside the darkened building. "Can't see anybody, must have been mistaken," he muttered before driving on. When the recording ended, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. Michael's attorney requested a brief recess, which the judge granted. When they returned, Michael's defiance had transformed into desperate damage control. "Your Honour, I was emotional after my father's funeral," he began. "I said things I didn't mean. I did leave my mother at the gas station, but I knew the Hansens lived nearby. I was coming back for her after she had time to reconsider the assisted living facility." The judge's expression showed he didn't believe a word. "Mr. Pearson, the dashboard camera footage is time-stamped at 5:17 p.m. Mrs. Hansen's testimony states she found your mother at approximately 9:30 a.m. the following day. Are you suggesting you intended to leave your elderly mother in an abandoned building for over 16 hours during a documented ice storm?" Michael had no answer. The judge called a 1-hour recess to review all evidence before making his ruling. As we waited in the hallway, Claire squeezed my hand. "It's going to be okay, Eleanor." But what neither of us knew was that Michael wasn't finished fighting, and his next move would lead to the most surprising moment of all. When court resumed, Michael's attorney announced that they wished to propose a settlement. Michael would withdraw all claims to power of attorney and the house sale if I would agree not to press criminal charges for the abandonment. The judge looked to me for my response. Every eye in the courtroom was on my face. I thought of all the dignity violations, being called confused, being interrupted, being seated in the second row at my husband's funeral. I thought of the financial manipulations, the unauthorized withdrawals, the fraudulent power of attorney, the attempt to steal my home. I thought of being erased, my contributions minimized, my history rewritten, my independence questioned. Most of all, I thought of standing in the snow as my son drove away, leaving me to freeze. Your Honour, I said, my voice stronger than it had been in months. I don't need a settlement. I need justice. The judge nodded and delivered his ruling. The power of attorney was invalidated, the house sale cancelled, and all financial accounts returned to my sole control. Additionally, he referred the case to the district attorney for potential criminal charges of elder abuse and reckless endangerment. Mrs. Pearson, the judge concluded, this court finds you fully competent to manage your own affairs. Your home remains yours. As we left the courtroom, Michael tried one last time. Mum, he called, his voice breaking. Where am I supposed to go now? I was counting on that money. I turned to face him calm and clear-eyed. You should have thought of that before you left me in the storm. What would you have done if someone who promised to protect you betrayed that trust so completely? Would you have found the strength to stand up in a courtroom and demand justice? Or would forgiveness have been your path? Our generation was taught to keep family matters private, to sacrifice ourselves for harmony. Yet sometimes, speaking the truth isn't just for ourselves. It creates ripples that protect others. When I spoke out, 3 other elderly individuals in our community came forward with similar stories of exploitation. The courthouse now hosts monthly seminars on elder rights, inspired by what happened in that courtroom. Share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have pressed charges against a child who betrayed you this way? Your perspective might be exactly what another woman needs to hear today as she struggles with similar painful decisions between family loyalty and self-preservation. Tonight marks exactly 2 years since the verdict that not only saved my life, but sparked what the local newspaper called the Silver Revolution. The headlines that once read, "Son charged with attempted murder of elderly mother," have evolved into "Widow's ordeal inspires new elder protection laws in 17 states." The transformation began with 4 words. Exhibit A, Your Honour. I still live in my craftsman bungalow, the mortgage-free home that Michael tried to steal. The roll-top desk sits by the bay window, but now it contains more than just family records. It holds letters from 1,187 elderly men and women who've contacted me since my story went viral. Men and women who recognized their own children's concerned suggestions about downsizing for what they truly were. The dashboard camera video that saved my life has been viewed 14.7 million times. Tom Hansen and I have testified before 3 state legislatures, helping craft Eleanor's law, requiring mandatory cooling-off periods before any transfer of elderly assets and making abandonment of vulnerable adults a felony with mandatory minimum sentences. My home now serves as headquarters for the Silver Line, the hotline we established that receives 78 calls daily from elderly individuals sensing the early warning signs of exploitation. Our team of volunteer retired attorneys has recovered over $34 million in fraudulently obtained assets. Michael is serving 7 to 10 years for attempted murder, elder abuse, and fraud. His Mercedes was sold at auction. I purchased his Rolex watch for $1, the judge's idea of poetic justice, and it sits in a glass case in my living room, permanently stopped at 5:17 p.m. The bruises from that night faded long ago, but I still have 3 partially numb fingers from frostbite. They remind me daily of how close I came to vanishing without a trace, like so many elderly who simply disappear when they become inconvenient. Claire moved from Minnesota last year, taking the house next door when it became available. Every Tuesday, we host Silver Sentinels meetings, now attended by 63 regular members who've learned to recognize the warning signs and document suspicious behaviors. The pain hasn't disappeared. Some wounds leave permanent scars, but those scars have become armor, protecting not just me, but thousands of others who learned from my story. If you're watching this and something in your child's behavior has triggered that ancient warning system our generation possesses, trust it. The predator's greatest weapon is your shame. The exploiter's most powerful ally is your silence. Document everything. That innocent-looking camera your child gifted you for security? Unplug it before discussing anything financial. That helpful son who streamlined your online banking? Check every transaction. That daughter who suggests you shouldn't strain your eyes reading all those financial statements? Read every word. Create your evidence vault today. A safety deposit box your children don't know about. A trusted friend with copies of your will and financial documents. A dedicated email account where you forward concerning messages. Note every time you hear, "You're confused. You already agreed to this. Don't you remember?" These aren't signs of your failing memory. They're deliberately planted seeds of doubt designed to make you question your own judgment. Remember this. The generation that survived economic upheavals, world conflicts, and technological revolutions doesn't need protection from decisions. We need protection from those who would take our decisions away. The beautiful home you paid for through decades of sacrifice isn't a burden you should be relieved of. Your carefully accumulated savings aren't just sitting there. Your independence isn't negotiable. Trust your instincts. They've kept you alive for 7 decades for a reason. Every day, another elderly person is told they're just confused when they question missing funds. Another widow hears it's for your own good, as her home of 50 years is sold against her will. Another grandfather is dropped at a facility hundreds of miles from everyone he knows. Your story of resistance matters. Your experience could save someone else from predators wearing familiar faces and using children's voices. If this story resonated with you, don't just hit like. Share it now with someone who needs these warning signs. Subscribe to Her Silver Truth for more stories of women who transformed from victims to warriors, from the silenced to the hard. Be sure to check out the video appearing on your screen now for another powerful story of transformation. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.